Hello my friends, HM here. I make videos about topics that are important for whether the future will be better or worse. In today's video I will talk about the Russian civil war that abruptly ended because Prigozhin, the leader of Wagner mercenary group, struck a deal to get in exile in Belarus and also withdraw all of his Wagner forces. The video is not long. I'll talk a little bit about what happened and then I'll talk about the reasons that Prigozhin did this. And finally, I'll talk about how Ukraine have benefited from it. But let's get to it. First, I'll have to start my PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so apparently what happened is that the president here of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, he is a 20-year-old friend of the Wagner boss Prigozhin, pictured here, and Lukashenko is pictured here. This guy here, Lukashenko, he convinced the Wagner boss to step down, order his troops back, and then go into exile in Lukashenko's country, Belarus. That's apparently what happened. We do not know the exact details of this deal, but it looks like other Wagner leaders will also go to Belarus. And it looks like the Wagner forces, they will simply enroll in the Russian army as they were ordered to do a couple of weeks ago by the Russian Defense Ministry. So Putin has won this drive definitely. The clear winner here is Putin, and Wagner will cease to exist. But is it over? The rebellion is definitely over, but it has also shown that Russia is not united, and it has shaken Putin's authority in Russia that something like this could happen. Also, I expect that Putin will have Prigozhin assassinated in Belarus as soon as the Wagner forces have been fully enrolled in the Russian army and therefore are not likely to make another rebellion in case their former leader here, Prigozhin, is assassinated. But Putin will assassinate Prigozhin because that's what he does with everybody who opposes him. The big question that everybody are asking is, why did Prigozhin surrender? I have been all around the internet to try to find someone who had a really good explanation of that, and I couldn't find any. Found plenty of explanations, but none of them were very convincing. It's a mystery with no obvious and rational explanation, in my opinion. I think Prigozhin made a bad decision that will end his life in a couple of months when he will be assassinated by Putin's agents in Belarus. Also, the reality is that Wagner and Prigozhin had a good chance of taking control of all of Russia. And there are 4 reasons for that. Moscow was mostly undefended by the Russian army, because 90% of it or even more is down in Ukraine fighting Ukraine army. And also Wagner had taken control of 2 key cities, Rostov and Lipetsk, that controlled the supply of weapons, fuel and ammunition to Russian army in Ukraine. So they really had them. And also Wagner, perhaps not many know that, but Wagner is rather popular in Russia, and he could have recruited new troops to fight for Wagner, as many Russians, up to 15 to 20% on the right political spectra in Russia, and also 15 to 20% on the left political spectra in Russia. They're very unhappy with Putin's rule. I have a little video to show that. How did Prigozhin leave Rostov after he made this deal? Let's take a look on that.
And here you can see pausing for photos as he left the city. Prigozhin said Wagner soldiers would return to Ukraine.
Picture taken with him and are smiling. He's a real hero in that part of Russia, or in many places in Russia. And there's also this guy here. Where do I have these numbers from? That 15 to 20% of Russians on the right and 15 to 20% on the left are very unhappy with Putin's rule. I have that from this YouTuber here. He's actually a Dane, and he's employed by the Danish military as an analyst. And privately he has a YouTube channel that has exploded, and he has over 100,000 subscribers because he makes a lot of sense. So let's listen to this guy, and I will be quiet.
And in some interesting way, Prigozhin has managed to make himself attractive for many different groups that oppose Putin. Like, on the one hand, he is popular among the ultranationalists. Like, they share his criticism of the incompetence and the corruption in the Russian military leadership. And they admire the way that Wagner fighters have achieved results in the war. But then on the other hand, Prigozhin has also been saying things that are attractive if you're against the war. Like he's been saying positive things about Ukraine, and he has criticized the decision to begin the war in the first place, right? So interestingly, Prigozhin is standing out as a person who can unite people with different points of view that are all opposed to Putin. And this is interesting because according to even the official opinion polls in Russia, there's about 15 to 20% of Russians in each of these categories. So potentially you have like 30 to 40% of the population that Prigozhin can appeal to. And that is more than enough to make a revolution.
Okay, so this guy here clearly thinks that Prigozhin was popular enough to start a revolution and he could have recruited more for his army. And then I have a fourth reason why he might have succeeded, and that is that Prigozhin said on his Wagner Telegram channel, maybe I can actually pull it in here so we can read it. Prigozhin said here, most of the military support us wholeheartedly. Messages arrived. Thanks, guys. Finally, there will be justice in the army. Finally, you make them give us ammunition and they'll stop using us as cannon fodder. You know, it might be a complete BS from Prigozhin's side. Maybe he didn't receive any letters that everybody was supporting him. And most of the Russian army, I don't think so. But I would say that he probably has some support in the Russian army. And probably some would have switched sides, especially because he was controlling their ammunition and fuel coming in, so he could have cut supplies to those that were not supporting him and kept it coming for those who were supporting him. And then he had a fair chance of tipping the balance of power here. But he didn't. He made that deal, and I think that was a deal that he will regret, and I think he'll be killed. Okay, so what remains of this video is that we should assess how much Ukraine actually benefit from this event here. They certainly didn't get as much out of it as many of us had hoped. I certainly had hoped that Russia would be in a full-blown civil war with Wagner fascists killing Putin army fascists and vice versa, because obviously this world will be a better place with less fascists in it. Fascists are no good. They only think of themselves and they only create misery for everybody else in this world. We need to work together. We need to be peaceful. We need to deal with each other in civilized ways and also in democracy, which I believe very strongly in, and in freedom. People cannot be happy and live happy lives without democracy and freedom. And these fascists should not rule the world. That's my opinion. So it's a big shame they didn't destroy themselves. But some good did come out of this, as Russia here has lost 6 helicopters and 1 big jamming airplane. Down here we see there's a big airplane that was shot down that was on video on various internet sites. And it's a big jamming plane with a crew, I believe, of 15 people. They were jamming Wagner forces that were moving along, so they had a problem communicating, and also their air defense systems was jammed. So that was a loss, and 6 helicopters is no small thing. Moreover, the Russian Air Force was bombarding Wagner convoys, so perhaps hundreds of Wagner forces may have been killed along with lots of destroyed vehicles. There's very little information on the internet about the scale, apart from this, about what was shot down of helicopters and that 1 airplane. But it could have been quite severe, the scale of this, and Wagner's losses could have been quite severe. And perhaps maybe that had convinced Prigozhin that he was losing and he couldn't win it. And then he got convinced here by his 20-year-old friend that he might get lucky and survive this thing anyway. And then he made this deal, and that was it. But I highly doubt it was a deal that will benefit Prigozhin. As I said, I think he will be assassinated. Of course, a full-blown Russian civil war, that would have won the war for Ukraine, because they would need the troops to fight each other in Russia, and then they couldn't care less about Ukraine. So it's a big disappointment. I think the biggest benefit, apart from these losses that Wagner had and also Russia had, is that more Russians will now consider this Ukraine war a disaster for Russia, and also Russia will be less united than ever. And I think I will end my video here. I wish you a fulfilling life in freedom and democracy. Goodbye.